Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. In the time that I have personally spent on the deep and dark web, which I can say with all honesty has probably been way too long, I've seen some incredibly bizarre and really messed up stuff. A lot of what I've seen and done could probably get me into legal trouble if I went into detail. Thankfully, I know what I'm doing for the most part, and I have protected myself. This isn't my first story on your channel, but I'm not going to say which one was mine. I'll leave that for the listeners to figure out. I will say that in that story, the actions were definitely not legal. That said, I thought that I would send you another story and send you one that wasn't me doing anything, but me finding something on the deep web that was genuinely unexpected and legitimately creepy as hell. I can't remember the exact point in time that this happened, but it was probably a while back, pre-COVID, which honestly feels like an eternity ago. So, probably early 2019. I was on one of my typical dark web excursions, trying to decide what I wanted to do while perusing through various onion links, and I ended up on a page that was incredibly out of place. You see, on the dark web, you get tons of strange stuff, adult content, and what have you. But this page looked like someone's personal homepage. This page had a guy's picture on the page, front and center, and it went into a lot of detail explaining who exactly this guy was. It had his name, location, professional experiences, software and apps that he had developed, companies that he had contracted with and worked for, and etc. To be honest, this page could almost have been a substitute for the guy's LinkedIn. You know, if it weren't an onion link on the deep web. I started reading his info out of curiosity, honestly, and I hadn't seen any other page where a person laid out their life for the deep web. But this guy was putting it all out there: experience, education, who he's worked with, what languages he knew, all of it. I seriously went through all of his pages one by one, pretty much becoming this guy's biggest fan, until I got to the bottom. There was a page titled, "To the Love of My Life, Chrissy." I was already this deep into this guy's information, so I figured, why not learn about the person that he obviously was in love with? It couldn't hurt, right? But before I press on into what was on this page, I'm going to remind you that this page was laid out like a CV. This guy was very professional and was obviously very proud of his accomplishments. It had a ton of his personal information, and it seriously looked like something that he could have sent to a prospective employer. But this page undid all of that. At the top of the page was a brief explanation of who exactly Chrissy was. Apparently, Chrissy was a former co-worker to this guy. They had worked together at a previous contract gig, and he was very obviously painfully obsessed with her. This page had a header title that seriously read, "Chrissy is my angel, my light, and God wants me to have her," which was followed by an incredibly cringy poem about how she was his world and how his life was only worth living while he was with her. Then there was a picture of a woman, who I'm going to go out on a limb and assume was Chrissy. Now, all of that was within the first section of the page, and isn't too terrible, right? It's creepy, but it wasn't necessarily terrifying. Well, after that is where things started to get freaking weird. After his quick confession of how much he loved Chrissy, this guy threw out any semblance of sanity, and his mental state became very apparent. He had picture after picture after picture of this woman. Again, creepy. He was obviously collecting pictures of her, but it just kept escalating. Several of these pictures, in fact most of them, were pretty obviously taken without Chrissy's consent. Some looked like they were taken at company events or with friends. Some looked like they were taken from a Facebook page. But a lot of them were taken of her at candid moments. There were pictures of her at her desk, at an office, in the parking lot, eating lunch with friends, at a park with, I'm assuming, her husband and kids, the grocery store. There were even some pictures taken of her through a window and through curtains of her in pajamas, and some of her in her underwear in her home. This guy was clearly a stalker, which, yeah, was obvious, but he had taken it to almost the furthest level he could. By this point, we've clearly established that he was an obsessed stalker creep, but there was more. He had actually photoshopped Chrissy's face onto adult models, and then photoshopped his own face onto males in the same pictures. Each picture has its own description of what it was supposed to be like. Me and Chrissy on our honeymoon, a hot summer night, expressing our love, and etc. And all of them obviously photoshopped pictures of adult content with their faces. This man was obsessed, yes, which is creepy in its own rights, but this was a level above obsession. This was him living out a creepy fantasy with a woman that had a life of her own, and she had no idea how deep in love with her this weirdo was. I honestly felt bad for her, and if I knew how to get a hold of her, I would have let her know so she could file a restraining order. I remember after all the freaky pics, there was a section at the end that said something like, "Chrissy and I are soulmates. We met in heaven before we came to earth, and God wants us to be together. We will be the modern Adam and Eve, lovers meant to usher in the future. She will see how much I love her, and we will embrace as we welcome our new lives." Which, to me, sounded a bit like him saying he was going to force her to love him. But I don't know. In the end, this was one of the weirdest things that I have seen on the dark web. It may not be super creepy to some people, but it just makes me wonder how many weirdos obsess with their women co-workers like this and don't build their own dark web shrine. Have you ever been in a position where you found yourself questioning everything you believed to be true? Perhaps it was something religious or political. Maybe someone you trusted did something to undermine your trust in them. Maybe someone close to you turned out to be a monster. When I was a sophomore in high school, my father began what he referred to as a project in our basement. He never specified what this project entailed, only that it was for his business, and whatever went on down there was to be kept strictly confidential. Hell, he even went so far as to soundproof the basement walls. And although I found it strange that his business would require that level of secrecy, I didn't push the issue. As for my social life, I had a small group of friends at school, some of whom were into all kinds of kinky, bizarre, and sometimes outright disgusting pornography. I typically tuned out whenever the subject came up, as I didn't spend much time on the internet. I would just look up NFL or NBA highlights, and social media sites like Twitter and Facebook never really appealed to me. One day, my friend Kevin brought up a subject that I had never considered before and has come to haunt me ever since. Something he referred to as the dark web. What he described was horrific. Hitman advertisements, videos of animal abuse and mutilation, crush porn, and realistic or possibly even genuine depictions of awful things. I'm not sure why, but his descriptions of this dark web piqued my curiosity. Could such a freaked out place truly exist on the internet? Kevin invited us over for the weekend so he could show us what he was talking about, and we agreed to come over. Saturday came, and Kevin had managed to hack into the dark web. And it didn't take very long for the rest of us to see that he was telling the truth. All the awful things he had described to us were on full display. It was nauseating to say the least, and after about 20 minutes of scrolling down, Kevin came across a link to an untitled livestream. Out of curiosity, he clicked on the link. The screen changed to pitch black, and after a short time, we were greeted by a digital clock gradually counting down. And when it reached 0, the numbers disappeared and the black screen remained. For the next 30 seconds or so, we heard a deep and raspy breathing sound. Eventually, a beam of light appeared, presumably from a flashlight, and it illuminated some strange man wearing a hideous mask, a top hat, a suit, and a cape. And when he spoke, his voice was distorted, I'm guessing to help keep his identity hidden.
Good evening.
The man finally spoke.
And thank you all for joining us this evening. You may call me Hawkins. And boy, do we have a show for you tonight. A pair of helpless victims.
With that, the rest of the screen became illuminated. We saw a small room with the walls painted red. On the back wall were 2 women, one very obese and the other in good shape, both of them nude and trapped to a wall in mounted cufflinks. Hawkins approached the obese woman and stroked her face very creepily.
Oh, you are one ugly, disgusting bitch. Ugly creatures like yourself don't deserve to share the world with the pretty ones.
He then glanced at the second, more attractive woman.
Am I right?
She said nothing.
I have something special planned for you, sweetheart. But first, let us deal with the ugly one.
I began feeling nervous. I was hoping this was all just a strange act, but with everything that we had been shown on the dark web so far, I wasn't too sure of that.
Garden shears,
Hawkins shouted. A pair of hands appeared from off camera to give the masked man some garden shears. He then approached the woman and pried the shears open.
What a pity. If only you were better looking, I might not have to do this.
And with that, he began cutting into the woman's breast, leading to deafening screams. My friends and I all gasped in shock, one of whom began to vomit. He then brought his attention to her ankles and tried cutting through them but couldn't.
No matter. Chainsaw!
I felt queasy at the mention of a chainsaw, and after receiving the item, he cut off the woman's feet and then began cutting into her abdomen, leading to blood and guts spraying everywhere. The obese woman passed out from shock, while the second woman also began sobbing in terror. Eventually, Hawkins shut off the chainsaw.
Let her bleed. Now, as for you, whip.
The unseen assistant handed him a whip, and he proceeded to give the second woman a number of brutal lashings. When he was finished flagellating her, he released her from her cufflinks, and she dropped to the floor very suddenly, and before she could get up, Hawkins kicked her very hard in the abdomen. It was at this point when Kevin noticed a chat box on the side. Most of the messages from viewers were expressing utter glee and satisfaction at this horrific sight. Outraged, Kevin typed into the chat box, "What the hell is wrong with you people? I warn you, the police will hear about this." As the surviving woman lay gasping for air on the floor, Hawkins unzipped his pants and appeared to be taking a position behind her. Suddenly, the anonymous assistant spoke up. "Hey boss, check out this message." Hawkins kicked the woman again and walked over to the webcam.
Oh, a tough guy, huh? Gonna call the cops on me, eh, Kevin?
It was like a ton of bricks was dropped on all of us. Did that man really just mention my friend's name? Suddenly, a box appeared containing his full name and address, and Kevin was frozen in terror.
Whatever. I have all the information I need on you. Looks like I'll be seeing you soon.
Hawkins walked away back toward the woman, and Kevin finally shut the computer off and curled up into a ball, shaking uncontrollably. The rest of our friends bailed out, but I chose to stay behind, even though I was also frightened out of my wits. Fortunately, nothing happened that night, but Kevin did not get any sleep at all. He was a nervous wreck for the next few days, unable to concentrate in class and staying quiet at lunch table when he was normally very talkative. Several weeks passed, and he began to mellow out and return to his old self. The situation on the dark web appeared to have blown over. Until one Friday night, that is. I was watching the 10 o'clock news when a report broke out about a mass homicide that occurred a few miles away. I was shocked and horrified when I saw a reporter standing outside what I recognized as Kevin's house. His mother, father, and both his siblings were found dead, and Kevin himself was reported as missing. "My God, they got him," I said to myself. I woke up in the middle of the night to relieve myself when I saw my father reach the top of the staircase. His clothing was covered in dirt, which I found very odd. "Dad, it's 2 a.m. What are you doing awake?" "Fixing a busted sprinkler." "At 2 a.m.? Why not? Is there some law that says I can't?" I sighed and said, "Whatever, Dad." And I did my business, then went back to sleep. The next afternoon, my dad went out to run some errands. While he was gone, I suddenly decided out of the blue to check out the basement. And looking back, I'm not sure why I picked this particular moment to be a naughty boy. I didn't usually have a rebellious streak, but what the hell? I wanted to see what the secrecy was all about. I reached the bottom of the stairs and began checking out the basement. So far, nothing looked out of the ordinary from the last time that I had set foot down there, aside from a few items being in a different place. Then, I looked underneath the staircase, and I had noticed something that definitely was not there before. A door. I walked to the door and opened it, and a light turned on automatically, and what I saw shook me to my very core. It was a small room with red walls and mounted cufflinks. In a corner, I saw blood-stained garden shears and a chainsaw. On the wall, next to the door, was a desk with a computer and a webcam. I also saw that ugly mask, that same mask worn by the man that I only knew as Hawkins. I was standing in the same room where the awful livestream took place weeks earlier. I heard my father's voice shouting upstairs when he noticed that the basement door was open. He came down cussing up a storm, but he stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me standing in the entry of his secret room and holding the mask. We stared at each other in an awkward silence for a long time. My father was arrested shortly thereafter. He had soundproofed the walls to prevent the possibility of anyone's screams from being heard around the house. My friend Kevin and those two women from the live stream were buried in the backyard, their bodies thoroughly dismembered and laid on top of one another. I guess that explains my father's late-night yard work. And as to why he took the name Hawkins as his dark web identity, he confessed to murdering another man back in 1995. The man's name was Carl Hawkins. 5 years have passed since I discovered the truth about my father. I haven't paid him one visit in prison. Eventually, he will be executed by means of lethal injection. I wish I could say that I'm saddened by this. He is still my father after all. But I feel cold and indifferent. Now, I am left to wonder whether he passed on some kind of bad seed to me. I fear that one day I will snap and become the same kind of monster that he had become. There is also a matter of my father's assistant. Who is he? My father refused to give away his identity. It makes me wonder if the mysterious assistant has begun his own sick little show on the deep web. I don't intend to find out, and I am never going on the deep web ever again. I've only had one bad experience with the deep web, and it is way more than enough in my personal opinion. I'm not an overly technical person, and I'm not a tech genius. I'm no hacker extraordinaire, but I do know my way around the internet, and I have an understanding of what indexing and non-index pages, or deep web, actually are. I took a few classes on the internet security, and there were a couple sections dedicated to deep web and dark web, or at least explaining what they were and how the technology worked, like onion routing and encryption, and I felt confident enough to get on the deep web and thought that I could keep myself safe. And that confidence was my first mistake, but in my defense, this situation could have happened on the surface web. It just made it that much creepier that it was on the deep web. Because I wasn't interested in any of the illegal content on the dark web, I kept myself confined to the part of the deep web that were closer to the surface. Basically, the wading pool of the deep web. Of these pages, I mostly visited things like forums and discussion boards, and I had this personal appreciation for anonymous conversations. And while I wasn't a troll or aggressive or anything, I was a bit more out with my opinion and personality, as there wasn't a name associated with the statement. Now, in order for this to all make sense, I have to explain a bit about what happened and then kind of explain the how, because it won't make sense otherwise. As I stated, I spent a good amount of time on the forums. I spoke with people that I honestly considered my friends, and I learned a lot. It was actually kind of nice, kind of like there was a place that I belonged, like a bar, but with text and random people that were faceless. Now, on the main forum I would use, most people signed their posts and messages with a pseudonym. Of course, there was no control over this, and anyone could use anyone else's name on their post, and no one would be the wiser. Strangely enough, it was kind of an honor system, and most people followed it. My name on this site was ironically, No Girls on the Net. It was supposed to be a joke, a play on the claim that there are no girls on the internet, just guys pretending to be girls. This was ironic because I was a girl. Anyways, on this forum, I was fairly well known to a lot of people in my subboards, and people would refer to me as girl. I know, not exactly specific, but typically when someone said girl, they were talking to me. Anyways, I was friends with a lot of people on this page, and they were all decent. Never ran into anyone that I thought was really creepy for the most part. But that all fell apart when I got a message on Facebook one day from some guy that I had never seen before named Derek. And the message just said, "Hey girl." At first, I didn't put two and two together. I thought he was just being a douche, and I told him as such. My response was simply, "What an incredibly rude and derogatory way to refer to someone. Give me one reason I should even bother responding to you beyond this." This guy responds with, "I thought that's what everyone called you. At least, that's what I've always called you. You're No Girls on the Net, right?" When I read this, I was a bit freaked out. How had this person found my personal Facebook? There was absolutely no connection between me and that account, and I was always careful not to post anything that could be considered personally identifiable. And I had no idea how he could have connected the dots. I asked who he was, and he once again asked if that was my username. I didn't want to tell him yes, but I also didn't want to say anything that may indirectly confirm that it was me. So, I ended up just having to say that it wasn't me, and that I hoped that he found whoever it was that he was looking for. He responded with a smiley face, and then that was it for that conversation. I thought that was the end of it. I thought he had bought it. But I was wrong. I was very wrong. About a week later, I got a letter in the mail. And while this was a bit off, in today's day and age that is, I didn't think much of it. I took it in and opened it, then pulled out the letter. It was a printed letter that pretty much just said, "Don't lie to me, girl. I know it's you. I want to get to know you better. Here's my phone number. Shoot me a text when you get this. P.S. I will know that you got it." I was seriously freaked out. This guy was sending me letters, which meant that he knew my address. Not only that, but he claimed that he would somehow know if I got the letter and didn't tell him. How? That's when I looked over the envelope to see if I could find a return address. And then I realized that there wasn't one. On top of that, there weren't any stamps on the envelope either, which meant that it hadn't gone through the post office and it was most likely hand-delivered, which then told me how he was going to know I got it. My next mistake was calling the number. If I was going to fix this problem, I was going to have to do it head-on. I pulled out my phone and called him, and when he answered, he started off with, "Hey, sweetheart." I was legitimately disgusted. My response to him was, "I'm not your sweetheart. I don't even know who the hell you are. How did you find my information?" He avoided the question, but started saying that he was in love with me and that he needed me in his life. I once again told him that I had no idea who he was and that I wasn't interested. He told me to get interested or things were going to be difficult between us. I had had enough. I told him that he was a creep and that he needed to get a life, and then I hung up. He tried calling me back a couple times, but I ignored it. Then he texted me, and I think that I nearly pissed myself. The message that he sent me said, "You're going to love me, one way or another. Don't make me hurt you." Then followed it up with, "See you later, sweetheart." Obviously, I was panicked. This dude was a super creep, and he had no issue with being creepy out in the open like this. But I really didn't have much in ways of options since he hadn't actually done anything. Being a creep isn't really a crime until they escalate. Well, it escalated pretty quickly. It was actually that same night when things happened. Around 8 that evening, I heard a knock on my door. I, unfortunately, knew it was most likely him. I pulled the curtain open from the side window, and I saw this guy standing there in a hooded sweatshirt and black pants, pretty obvious red flag in this case. He stood there at the door and kept knocking, then started yelling that he knew that I was home. I stayed off to the side where he couldn't see me, and I dialed 911 on my cell phone. When they asked what the emergency was, I said, loud enough for him to hear me, that there was some creep trying to break into my house, hoping that it would be enough to get him to go away. What I didn't expect was him to smash the glass of my front door with a hammer and reach in to unlock the door. What he didn't expect was my brother, a trained police officer, to come around the corner with his gun locked on him the second he stepped into the house. As soon as my brother screamed, "Get on the ground!" this guy started yelling, "Don't shoot me," and then fell to his knees. My brother restrained him, and the cops showed up to arrest him. When they got him out and in their car, they came back to tell us what they had pulled off of him. This dude came with zip tie cuffs, a large knife, the hammer obviously, and a pillowcase stuffed into the hoodie pocket. Basically, it was like that he planned to kidnap me, cuff me, put the pillowcase over my head, and take me out to his van, which he had parked just outside. In the van, they found condoms, adult toys, and various other creeper things that I don't really want to think about right now. So that's the what. But the question becomes the how. How did he find me? How did he know who I was? How did he connect my stupid username with me as a person? Easy. I was an idiot and apparently had clicked a link that he posted on the forum. This guy had linked to something on the forum page that I apparently was interested in, and it had malware that loaded into my system because I had some stupid software, something like JavaScript or Flash or something that was out of date, and this guy was able to drop a keylogger on my system. That, plus those fantastic little things in Chrome and Firefox that will save your personal info for quicker entry. Things like your address and name and all that. Yeah, that helped him tremendously. This guy had infected my system, and I had, unbeknownst to me, given him all my personal information. Then he turned into a super creep. Like I said above, this could have technically happened on the surface web, but I think it was more likely to happen on the deep web forum, because I had taken my anonymity for granted. I thought I was safe. I thought I was invincible because my name was not connected to the board or the post. So take that as a lesson. Do not think that anonymity is invincibility, and make sure you update your computer. And here are the top comments from my last video. Welcome to Miss Creepy Tales Riddle Time. If you know the answer, feel free to leave it in the comments, and the winner gets to be featured in the next video. The alphabet goes from A to Z, but I go Z to A. What am I? Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.